Right. Okay, so that brings us back to where we were before. So we were looking at, we were beginning the concept of inclusion as one of the components of the model that we're looking at. We've just finished looking at the two elements here. We're looking at the purpose and positive change, because generally, whenever we identify an organization with its function or purpose, we are looking at making changes from some previous existing situation. Now, the inclusive element here is probably one of the most tricky ones, because inclusivity means that we need to understand other people, we need to value those people's views, we need to engage with their diversity of views, and we have to look at their at opening our perceptions to actually accept those those differences that we may not necessarily agree with, but at least what we have to do is to understand why people have these particular views. And this is difficult because we're going to come across people with differences in various organizations that may may be contrary to some very personal principles that we hold. So for example, some of the aspects of individuality that I brought up here were gender, sexual orientation, culture. Um, those are big blanket statements that involve being inclusive towards individuals who we don't necessarily agree with, but we have to work with, and that's the situation we find ourselves having to be inclusive. Now, you can't fib and lie about inclusivity, because your actions will speak louder than words. Because some people say they're inclusive, but they're not. Um, and you can see the gap between what people say and what people do. And that is something that is important for us to recognize, that the act of being inclusive requires a lot of effort. Yes, Ian.
Oh, sorry about that. So I wasn't hearing it, but it's from on my end. So I just made the necessary arm adjustment.
Okay, see your
My
hand still up.
apologies. Yeah, yes,
That's
sir.
okay. No worries. You can put your hand down now, I guess. All right, cool. So, um, now, why is it important that we include more people and more perceptions? It's because if we remember, in terms of working smarter, one of the methods of working smarter is to work collectively smarter. So we have to remember that the more people or from different and backgrounds and environments looking at an issue or problem, it brings more perspective to that particular issue and problem. And therefore, we can find different solutions that would not necessarily come from a group of individuals who are very similar in their perspectives. And that is a very important thing that we need to recognize, because it will help us to respect the fact that we need to value the input of these individuals. So inclusivity has strength, because it means it broadens the background that you're looking at problems with. If everybody's coming from the same place, for example, if we had only police officers in this group, then the way in which they may look at an issue or problem may be couched primarily from their experience from working and interacting in that environment. Whereas we have a number of people from the Army, from the fire services, from the Air Guard, from immigration. They bring a broader perspective to looking at an issue, which is one of the reasons why we need to be more open and inclusive in our approach to problem solving, in particular when we're trying to work through situations that's coming up. So inclusivity is something that you as a leader need to create in your organization and to foster in your organization. Now that requires that you develop listening skills and listening with empathy. Now, I know one of the issues that is going to come across here is what would happen in being inclusive in a circumstance where the individuals coming in sit in a place that is contrary to how you view the world around you. Say, for example, you come from a background that frowns upon homosexuality. How do you treat with somebody who is openly homosexual, being in an organization with yourself? How do you become empathic towards listening to that person when the very presence of that individual creates a disconnect for you or some sort of discordance in your mind? The concept here is, again, you don't have to agree with the individual, but you need to understand the person. Yes, Ishmael. Mr. Noel?
Yes, sir. So on that point, I agree with the last statement that you made. However, there is limitations as far as inclusiveness is concerned with some things, and I think it is also dependent on the law and I mean, for example, we haven't seen it happen yet in any great extent in Trinidad and Tobago, but it is spreading very quickly. The time will come when we are going to have the gender identity issue creeping into, let's say, like recruitment in the protective services, right?
Yes.
And we are going to have to treat with that. But until such time, respect and all of that, because when it and if it does happen, if it doesn't happen in that way, in terms of recruitment, it could happen with serving members, where we have the use of washroom facilities and all of that. Someone who identifies as something other than their natural birth, we're going to have to treat with those things, and I think legislation might have to govern that, because there's so far accommodation could go.
Yeah, because the first thing that has to change though is how society views those changes or those developments. Because the laws are in essence a reflection of what we hold to be important and critical for us. So, I mean, we've had situations where laws are, and we know this from experience, laws are slow to adjust to changes in society. And that in itself brings a challenge to any individual involved in a leadership position in which the framework in which they're operating is slow to absorb or to recognize certain changes that are taking place in society around them. And that's because the society is not as flexible as we think they would like them to be. So, for example, if we start to have an influx or as you said, an outbreak um, of gender identity issues or gender fluidity individuals coming to the forefront, um, how we go about treating with them then begins to speak to this particular characteristic of leadership, which is inclusivity. Do we wait until the laws start to reflect what society's views are, or do we try to be inclusive regardless? Yes, Frank. Frank Tom, sorry. Kevin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think Ishmael brought up a valid
Important
point.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, about inclusivity, and I for one, I personally believe in being inclusive, right? Because if we look back in history, and we're not even talking that long ago, right? People whose skin color that was the shade like our own, we were excluded simply because of the shade of our skin.
Correct. Yeah.
And what it took really, right? I mean, although some people may believe philosophically and based on people religious belief, right? That we are all men and human beings, and therefore we ought not to be excluded, right? But all it takes is a change in society's perception of whatever it is, and we could talk about marijuana, just like how they decriminalized marijuana not too long ago,
Right.
right?
Yes.
To say what inclusiveness or who is going to be included or excluded from what society determines to be normal or acceptable,
Correct. Yeah.
right?
Right.
So it is important to be inclusive, but it is also important to understand that there are boundaries, right? But I mean, society ultimately determines what those boundaries are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But all right. So I see Sheldon has his hand up.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
So I believe that the point that Frankton was making, respect to race
Uh-huh.
being being a issue in the past, I think this particular issue is a little more complex than that, because the issue of late is not even about being male or even being female; it's being something totally different,
Mm-hmm.
identifying as something else. So you see, there's black and white and gray, and now the gray is getting so wide that it's going to have serious implications. Where you're going to draw the line? Where are you going to draw the line? Because there's so much possibilities in this non-binary range
Yeah.
of identifying as this and that. That's where the problem is going to lie. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this conversation is going to get very, very stressful very soon, especially if
Yeah.
it comes to Trinidad, because you know Trinidad like to adopt everything that America doing. So
Well,
it going to come down here at some point.
I don't know. I mean, people who've come from that background will probably say to you that it's not that it comes from America, but it is maybe as a society they've had to face it well before a lot of other people because of the nature of how the issues presents itself. But again, yeah, there is going to be issues with that. All right, so Kevin, I
And
see Jack
and so
has his.
the next problem is two, is that when this person identifies as whatever it is now, they have the ability to change their mind, and tomorrow they identify as something else.
Well, that in itself speaks to
Because
whether.
that's what you'll be creating.
Well, no, but it then speaks to from an individual perspective, does that person have any credibility? If they identify in one circumstance as one thing, but then come and change that in another instance, then that person begins to lose credibility, and we don't believe them anymore. That in itself begins a whole different speaks a different thing here. That's follow through you're talking about. That's credibility. That has to do with their ethical values. Are you lying? In essence, that's what's happening. Are you lying because you want to manipulate the system, or are
No, but
you?
to identify as a disabled person when you are born with full capabilities and you cut off your hand to identify as a disabled person, or you identify as a female today because
Uh,
because of whatever reasons, and then tomorrow when you realize that this ain't working for me,
they
I
transition
want
back.
to I want to I want to transition back. This is what the problem is going to have. There was an issue just recently in the media where a young girl from the US said she identified as a male and started using hormonal testosterone injections to
Right,
change her identity. And with the injection, she started to lose her hair.
right.
Then she realized she made a mistake and came out and said that she wants to change. She has damaged herself so bad that she doesn't even think she could change back to what she originally is. When you allow the youth to decide for what they want when they don't even know themselves yet, and according to you, this particular class, know thyself. You don't even know yourself yet. But because you have the free will to do whatever you choose and society going helter-skelter to do whatever you want, this is going. It's not going to end well.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree with you, but at the end of the day, Those are all parameters that as leaders you have to deal with. All right, now Kevin, I see your hand up, but I saw Jack had his hand up before you. So Jack, what was it that you wanted to bring?
Yes, sir, as you rightfully state, right? If I am the owner of a business or organization, right, my HR department have to put things in place to
Treat with it.
combat these type of things from happening.
Okay,
You
so
want to identify as a
combat, what does that mean?
well, if somebody want to identify as a head of lettuce, right? Because some of them very outrageous, right? We don't hire heads of lettuce here,
Well,
right?
that's true.
So
Okay.
straight
You start
out,
question the person's sanity when you start thinking
correct.
about that.
Straight out the bat, we could do a psychometric test
Correct.
to ensure that this individual is fit for the job that is being done here. Job description, you could do cut a head of lettuce, take charge of 12 people, and we had to set the boundaries, right? The society could say what they want, do what they want, feel how they want, have the free will to do what they want. But when it comes to my organization and how my organization is run,
Yeah.
these are the measures that.
Jack, let me ask you a question. If you are placed in a situation where you are leading a public institution,
Right.
what happens then? And the laws and society has changed in terms of being more inclusive to people who perceive themselves to being vegetables as opposed to human.
As it happened, you as the leader in that organization need to record and recommend.
Yeah, but you're no longer practicing the inclusivity issue. Now we're taking it to ridiculous scales here, but
yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is that inclusivity is not it's not a convenient thing. If you're
Correct.
being inclusive, you have to be inclusive across the board.
All right.
Right? Once recognition has been given to any group of individuals in terms of a classification,
Mm-hmm.
then we have to be fair with our inclusivity. All right. So
But
whether somebody identifies as non-binary, meaning they identify as neither male nor female, but as
yes.
a
Yeah.
person. That's what I understand non-binary to be. Then does it make them less of an individual?
No, it does not.
Right, but that's
And
the point.
if we doing classification of a group to be recognized, then the persons that doing the classification needs to be as realistic as possible. And when they do the classification, make sure that the individuals that they're classifying could assist in the development society-wise.
Yeah, that's a tall order, a little beyond the discussions from this class. And this model is speaking to us being able to understand why. Now, I would be, frankly, very interested to understand how somebody could and why somebody would want to identify as a vegetable, as opposed to, I can probably get the concept um, of the gender issues faster than I can see being a more inanimate object. Um, but that'll be interesting to find out. And my thing would be try to understand, well, why did they come across that situation? All right, see this excited people. So Jack, thanks. Kevin, and then Sheldon, and then we'll have to move on, or else we'll never finish this chapter today.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Uh,
I totally agree with Shalon's perspective and contribution.
it wasn't
I
Sheldon.
also
That was Jack.
Gibbs.
Sorry.
Gibbs was before Jack,
Oh
right?
no, was it Gibbs?
Yeah,
All
Gibbs
right.
was before Jack,
Okay, cool. No worries.
right? And also with Sion's contribution,
Uh,
right? And I did mention that ultimately society will determine, right, what is going to be accepted or not. And believe it or not, it doesn't really happen in a vacuum. And as much as people may say that we always adopt what the US does, and as you mentioned before, we are talking about a government, or if you want to call it like that, a government, or we could talk about the UK and China and all these kind of places, in terms of governing themselves, are 200 years in front of us, 200, 300, some places are 1,000 years ahead of us. So, and they are much, much larger, and I believe way more diverse. So you are going to see, whether you view it as fortunate or unfortunate or unnatural, whatever it is, you are going to see these things happen. And it could be as a result of a mutation in how the way people just think, right? The perception of themselves. That is just the way that it is. And that is what happens when you interact with the environment and other people, and then sometimes the things that you eat. There are a lot of variables with it. We may not understand all, but
Well, more important, I think it's more, we may not like all of them, but we need to
right.
make an attempt to understand them. That is what inclusivity
But
is really speaking to.
well, I think sometimes you may not like it simply because you don't understand it. That could be the first part of it.
That, well, yeah, but again, they don't need to be mutually exclusive, but they can be, because I don't need to like something for myself, but I understand why some other individual will like it. If you understand the distinction I'm
Yeah,
trying to make here. And
I
that
understand.
is as much as what a leader can try and develop, because you don't necessarily have to agree with somebody's position that they've taken, but you at least need to understand or attempt to understand why they may have arrived at a situation like that. All right, now I see Sheldon's hand went back up, and Jack. Unless Jack, your hand was up from before.
So I just want to be brief. This Sheldon though.
All right, Sheldon, go ahead.
Yeah, but the question I asked in terms of if he was attached to the private sector. So I think the private sector will more focus on performance metrics because they're just concerned about profitability. They don't care what you identify as. What you do your work.
That's quite true. As long as
But
you
in,
do
the-
what I have to do
but
here.
in areas like national security, where our culture is a bit different, the psychometric testing is going to come in. And when you come and identify as a unicorn or whatever you want to identify as, it's going to raise red flags. Because at the end of the day, we cannot build teams, send people into dangerous situations, expecting a certain follow through and you in a different world altogether. It's not going to work.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
if we select it for the training, your particular group that you're training with going to isolate you and that could be a problem by itself.
yeah. That
So
could lead to
we
lots
had
of problems. Yeah,
a lot of headaches. So we had to
yeah.
deal with them situations early, quickly, and with some surety.
I hear you. I hear the concerns you're bringing up. All right, Sheldon. Thanks a lot for your contributions there. All right, but I'm hoping you get the broader picture of being inclusive as one of the needed skills for the relational leadership model. Inclusivity is a very important element. It speaks about it a lot in terms of trying to bring all of these unique individuals together within an organization. Um, I know, for example, I have some friends, they have real problems dealing with other men who identify as being what's the word? Gay, I think, is the phrase that might be acceptable, but at least homosexual in nature, and they can't get beyond the 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 homosexual activity or the action, and therefore they have problems dealing with the individuals themselves. So all they could think about is the sexual aspect of it, and not the person still being an individual or person, regardless of what they choose to do in the bedroom. That is something that a lot of people have problems with, and I've seen men in particular struggle. Women tend to be a little more, well, actually no, some women are very judgmental of men and women who engage in same-sex activities, and they can be even more unforgiving and more critical of individuals, um, and this can actually be something that has to be something that we have to try to work through. I mean, I don't know how to tell you to do this, but where you come across situations where you face issues of where you have serious problems with the way in which somebody's conducting their life, one of the things we have to remember is that it is not your responsibility to choose their life for them, but it might be your responsibility to be open to them participating in the organization's activities. That's going to be the most important element. The broader ability here would be to try more to understand why an individual might get themselves into that type of decision or life choice, as we speak about it, rather than judge somebody for what they're doing. And that is the part that we have to really suspend, and is probably the most difficult aspect of our own behavior, judgment. Um, we are not here to judge people. We are here to work with people to get things done. All right. So that's where we probably need to kind of leave it for now. All right. Um, because if you're unable to be inclusive in minor issues, then when you get to the bigger issues, it's going to be even more critical and more problematic, because in order to broaden the abilities of your organization, you need to have people from a lot of different types of environments that come in. And when we speak about differences, I mean, we spoke about some hard ones there in terms of gender and sexual orientation, but a simple one in terms of culture is when we start to think about things from a more international standpoint. One of the things we have to pay attention to is that cultural differences can also create some problems for us. So, for example, involving Venezuelans, for example, in organizations locally, I've seen a lot of people working with them, with Venezuelans, and bringing them into the workplace and stuff like that. But sometimes I have problems with the way in which I see individuals being treated in those work environments. Um, Sometimes I see it as almost as if we are being very exploitive of those individuals, and not necessarily literally opening our doors to them. Um, we would have to work at, as they become more entrenched in our society, more open to understanding them, which means effectively learning how to speak Spanish, and becoming more open to their view of how the world culture is all about. Barry, you got your hand up.
So I was going to say that we have to consider the fact that society most likely dictates how it is we behave and react to certain elements within our sphere. So
Uh-huh.
as we're talking about in inclusivity, yes, it is you as a leader might want to encourage that, but if the society around you is not accepting of it, it puts pressure on the leader in order to navigate between his his goal of team building and allowing everybody to develop their strengths and society's influences on the team.
Well, that's true. Yeah. But again, um, in some instances, the collective view of society is not necessarily the correct view. Let me just leave it at that. Um, we've had lots of situations where accepted norms in our society have been wrong in the past. So who's to say that the current set of norms that we have available at this point in time fall into some of those categories that we speak about? Frank, I see your hand up again.
Yes, sir. Just on the issue of with the Venezuelans that come here,
Uh-huh.
right, and work, and I know for a fact that a lot of the people who employ them, they exploit them.
Yeah,
They
I'm
ex-
fearful of
they
that.
they
So.
exploit them, right? And the funny thing about it is, when they came here, they just simply doing what we in Trinidad have been doing for years. When we go to the US and we came back, and we have been doing it for years.
Yeah, same kind
right?
of behavior.
Because we want to improve our quality of life, or we want to make a better opportunity for our children,
Yeah,
right? And they were forced into it,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and it tells you a lot about your society or individuals when you exploit these people when you don't need to.
Oh, we did the same things to Guyanese as well when they
Yeah,
were coming.
and we had to pray that we
We do it.
ourselves don't find ourselves in that same situation, because what do you think we're going to do? We're going to the closest place. If
Yeah,
Venezuela, we're going to,
or Guyana, as the case might
oh
be.
guy, we're going to do the same thing. So people have to understand, right? You always have to be empathetic to people when they're going through the situation, because
Yeah,
one day I had to pray that you never had the experience, and you meet the same treatment that you yourself meted out to people who themselves were going through difficulties.
yep. Interesting. Mr. Jack.
So that's to harp on what Kevin contributed.
Uh,
We as Trinidadians did that to everybody that came here. You know? Everybody. Even some African brothers I know that was staying in Port of Spain were
uh,
getting exploited as well. And some businesses do only hire Venezuelans. I don't know if it's because of the does work hard, or they can exploit the entire staff. You
there's a
understand?
possibility, yes. I've
Yeah, you
seen
know, but
I've seen that work ethic. I mean, and they do work hard and beyond what a lot of
correct. And
what all local people would
on
do.
the flip side of that, I know personally businessmen
Mhm.
who prefer to hire the Venezuelan without exploitation because of the same work ethic that I have.
Work ethic, yeah.
You know, so I believe some benefiting from it and some not.
Let's take advantage.
Yeah, correct.
True. All right. Okay, so one of the cues that we can listen in our language is when we are being inclusive is when you hear leaders utilizing the word I too much. I this and I that and I the next. When I think about that, when I look at this particular um, descriptor, it reminds me a lot about Trump and a lot of the ways in which he would speak about I did this and I did that and everything's I. But for an inclusive leader will be more attuned to speaking the word we as opposed to the I. So that movement away from the I to the we is going to be more important because it's how you open up your conversation to be able to make sure that people feel that they're included in what you're speaking about. And giving pause to people to make comments and ask questions is also going to be an element that we need to be looking at that from that point on. So I think we've gotten the understanding of what this whole inclusivity issue is going to be about and what the model is telling us that we need to practice and include in our activities of being inclusive across the board. So not only are we dealing with the people within the immediate group, but we also have to look at inclusivity of people outside of the group as well. We refer to those individuals as stakeholders and shareholders. Those individuals, a stakeholder, those people who are, very they have a part or direct outcome as a result of a change you're making in the organization, your stakeholder, as opposed to a shareholder is somebody who's peripheral but will also be impacted by the overall activity that's taking place. So when we're dealing with them, what we want to make sure is that they fall into the category of being supportive. But we know, and for them to be supportive, it means that whatever change that we're taking is of high importance to the individual and they have a high level of support. But we also have to remember that there are people who are going to fall into other categories, and therefore we need to pay attention to how best we are treating with those individuals and how to bring them into that supportive category. Let's take, for example, when the college is making changes to its programs, adjustments to the programs of so let's say programs come up for review every 5 years. So the MGPS just went through a period of review. In that period of review, the stakeholders that were involved in the process included students, faculty, the ministries that were affected by the changes, as well as the administration of the well, from the higher up in the ministry itself, as well as the board of directors. All individuals came together, and the organization has to speak with and include in their decision-making process about changes in the program with all the individuals who are directly affected and indirectly affected by the changes that are being made. Because for those students who get involved, they would fall into the area of it being of high importance, and they could either be antagonistic or supportive depending upon how they felt about the changes that were being made. Similarly, your ministries would have also fallen into that category of high importance because they're viewing the program as one that is utilized for promotion within the system. And that promotion that they're talking about there is important to them. Now, in terms of the broader ministries, it was of low importance, and therefore they may have seen it as a low priority activity. But we needed to make sure that sufficient funding was put into the change process, so that we needed to shift them from being low priority to being supportive as well, because that way they would put the funds in place for us to be able to make necessary changes if needed. If the changes are more just program based and that doesn't require significant expenditure, then their level of agreement and supportiveness is not necessarily going to be critical. But let's say, for instance, as part of this program, we wanted to start to include, just to say for some argument's sake, some elements of data analysis based upon crime surveys and crime statistics. I know you all have those systems operating in your places. Let's suppose we wanted to include that, plus include development of crime scene investigation techniques and that type of stuff as part of your overall development in terms of training, from all aspects, in terms of how to conduct investigations and so on. That would require getting more resources, and therefore getting ministry support from a financial point of view would be something of high importance to that stakeholder, and whether or not we would want them to be in the supportive aspect. So the idea here that we're talking about is understand that you have to include in your decision-making processes the people who are not directly impacted or fall under the umbrella of your organizations, but those peripheral or external to the organization that are also affected or can affect your outcomes. So you need to be inclusive to them as well, and that's something that you want to be doing. Now, the next element that we're moving to is empowerment. And generally in empowerment, what we're speaking about is trying to create a situation in which the leader of the organization provides for the two aspects of empowerment that they're speaking here. The sense of empowerment that allows people to claim ownership and actively participate in making the necessary changes in the organization. And two, to create the environment in which that empowerment is encouraged in the organization. Now, it means that generally when people begin, if they buy into your vision and your direction that you want to take, people need to be empowered to be able to claim ownership of parts of the activities they get involved with, the parts that they can actually impact upon to move the vision forward. It is the responsibility of the leader to make sure that they create the environment that people will want to do these things. Now, It generally, empowerment is something that exists in an organization, but there are things that can block it from happening. One is the attitude of the leader. Does the leader encourage people to get involved? Yes or no? Does the leader allow for errors to be made so that people could learn from it and not beat people down because they made a mistake? Because that's another way of cheating empowerment. You give people power, you don't provide sufficient resources, and then when they fail at the activity, which is what you were hoping they would do, you use it as a way to browbeat everybody and to say, see, I give these people this thing to do and they can't do it. All right? That means I got to do it all by myself. And that kind of empowerment is false. I've seen that been done many times in the past, and it's a technique that unfortunately a lot of Machiavellian style leaders tend to utilize. They give you just enough responsibility to mess up, and once you mess up, they ridicule you in front of everybody and create an environment where nobody wants to take any sort of responsibility for anything, thereby leaving all decision making to the leader himself. That is not empowering, that's emasculating. And that breaks down or makes an organization weaker, because now what you're doing is you create a situation where people won't want to be in that organization anymore. They will not want to be caught out like that and embarrassed um, in the activities that are going on. So empowerment is a critical part of the relational leadership power. The reason being is, if we think about this from a logical point of view, no leader can exist forever, which means that empowerment creates new leaders. So it's a form of succession planning. It means that you are creating individuals from within the organization who can begin to take the helm and move the organization forward, um, and keep the vision that was shared at the beginning of the process moving forward as well. Empowerment means that as a leader, you have many people who can take on the responsibility of leading either their aspect or various aspects of the organization's movement forward. So you don't have to focus your attention on everything all over. You can take a more macro view, understanding that the individuals that you have given leadership potential to or empowered to be able to do particular aspects are actually succeeding on it. And you will be able to look at it and say, okay, this person needs some assistance. I need to move some resources here for them and so on. So you're being fair and you're helping to build upon their empowerment and getting them to take more power as things move forward and actually accomplishing the goals that you have put in place to be able to move the organization forward. The climates that we create is going to be important in relation to that. Now, you all work in environments that I think are very limiting when it comes to empowerment, because a lot of your leaders view power as being something that's zero sum. So I think there's a slide that I have here. They're not willing to share power because they believe that if they share power, they will actually make themselves weaker. So it's almost like they fear dilution of power through empowerment of other people in an organization. Reality of that is that's a fallacy. If you empower more people around you, it makes your position as leader more powerful in itself, because now you have a whole set of other individuals who have the capacity to perform, even if you are sick or in a position where you're incapacitated. You have other people who can move into positions of power and move the organization forward. Because again, remember, we're speaking about an organization that is vision oriented, not position oriented. So the position is irrelevant to the organization. But it's critical for that person who's sitting in the position to be able to create the mechanisms necessary to move the organization forward into tomorrow. Yes, Barry.
Yes, I have to agree with you on the part where it is stated that the leaders and MC empowering subordinates as a form of weakness, right? And so much so, I remember at some juncture, I had a senior officer who would tell my subordinates, look, I see all the boss going on leave. So if I take time off, I suddenly become the boss. But the whole idea is that you senior to me, but I am the boss of them because I try to create an environment where it is everybody are empowered to work and achieve objectives. And then
Mhm.
when I leave, rather than you put yourself into that position, you prefer to have me be the boss and the bad guy rather than take up that position and allow things to flow smoothly.
Mm.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
Right, Barry, you kind of cut out there on us. Eh,
No, it's impossible if it is looking to get that level of empowerment moving forward with the
Yeah,
support of your administration and also your bosses.
yeah. And interestingly enough, the public sector really is position oriented, more than vision oriented, and a lot of people have very traditional views about how power works. Um, so it's either you have power or you don't. That's basically how it works. All right. Now, there is a presentation that's going to look at power in a lot of detail in terms of the types of power, sources of power, and how to use power and that type of stuff. We're just going to overview it here a little bit. All right. So there are different types of powers that exist in any organization. You have what they refer to as power dynamics, range from power over autocratic approaches to power with collaborative approaches to power alongside collegial approaches. So when we speak about power, we're speaking about power from generally from a positional situation. So most people arrive in an organization, they achieve a position, and that position affords them power. But there are different sources from which power can arise, and these are the sources that we speak about here. The sources are expert power, reverent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So, expert power is power that derives from your expertise, your knowledge, your skills. Those are going to be where everybody looks to you as the expert that gives you power. And therefore, based upon your experience and your practice, we know that you know what you're doing. So, therefore, when it comes to trusting somebody with decisions concerning this particular aspect of the organization or this aspect of action, then we're going to trust the experts as they give us that information. Um, some people try to fake this expert power, but it shows up very quickly when in the field in particular. You don't see them taking proving over time that they have that expertise that moves them forward. So this is one of the sources of where people get power from, their expertise. This is referent power. This refers to the nature of the individual. Generally, it tends to speak to people who are within an organization without any sort of position, but they've been there for such a long time that they have been able to arrive at a magnitude of institutional knowledge, and they're willing to share and mentor people in the organization. This generally is ascribed to a number of individuals who are looked upon with reverence, which is therefore the term referent power. All right, you are looked upon for advice in particular and guidance in decisions that have to be made because you're afforded that through your the type of individual you are and the amount of knowledge and information that you have allows you that position in an organization. Reverend power. Legitimate power is one that you're familiar with. This is the position, the power that your position in an organization gives you simply because you have been You've been given that position as a formal role. So you're the manager, supervisor, you're the CEO. The problem with it is that if you have limited experience and limited time at that post, you can lose that power because you can prove yourself to be not worthy of that positional power. That's something that can happen to very young managers when they arrive in a position of power and they start to exercise it. They lose it because they show themselves to be less than knowledgeable, less than responsible. It takes time to be able to practice legitimate power from a power-based structure, because legitimate power, as they say, is fragile, because you can easily damage your positional power or legitimate power when you abuse that situation. Yes, Jack.
So that will be based on the organization that you're attached to.
No, it's based upon any organization. You can have somebody rise into a position of power based upon promotion, but they can through decisions and actions that they make, they can what's the word? They can depreciate the power that they seek to use, because people look at them and he figure he know what he doing, he don't know one thing. That's the kind of attitude you start to get, or blowback you start to get from your subordinate staff as a result of abusing your legitimate power in an organization. Don't you know people like that? People in positions of rank in an organization who don't get that kind of who get that kind of reaction, that they just have rank for rank purpose.
Yes, 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 I do.
Right,
Yes,
right.
I do.
That's what I'm talking
Yes,
about.
sir.
It have a time factor attached to some
Yeah,
of the
younger ones.
it have a time factor attached to that. I just want to see in politics, right?
Politics has it too. Yes.
You know, yeah, that legitimate power could last for 5 years, yeah? Or 4 years, or however long.
Yeah, but you can nullify that power by making poor decisions and abusing that power
Okay.
quite early in your term, so to speak. All
So,
right.
so I mean, I know that is the relationship between the, let's say, the office holder, right, and the individual.
Yeah,
I
it's the individual who loses power.
right.
The office comes with legitimate power, right? But the person who works in the position can negatively impact their legitimate power quickly if they either abuse it or somehow or the other make a lot of really incorrect decisions, especially if they're making decisions in isolation of input from other people around them. That makes sense? So you're making
Yeah.
decisions without consulting anybody. You're just making these decisions that affect everybody, but you're not consulting with anybody, and you're not using any sort of consensus movements. Nothing. You're just doing it because as boss, you had to shut up and listen. That
It's
immediately, it doesn't mean you lose your position, Frank. What it
yeah, yeah.
means is that people begin to look at you like, I'm glad you're just there for a little while, because I can't wait for you to move from there. That kind of
Okay.
situation.
So
Yeah,
let me just ask a question real quick, right?
yeah. Go ahead.
So let me say somebody for whatever reason, maybe political or otherwise, ascends to the highest office within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service,
Uh-huh.
right? And you know, right? It is widely known that that murders, right, is essentially, whether is a lot or little. That is the measurement people use to say whether crime is high or not, right? And there are a lot of murders, and you say, you know what, I concede that we can't control the murders. So let's pray about it. Do you see where a person could where that could happen?
If that can happen,
Yeah, if that could happen, where that person's power quickly
well,
diminishes.
they abdicated their power by doing that.
Okay, I'm not very good with words, so but I like that. I like that word you use.
Sir Frank Tom
Abdicate.
setting you up, eh?
I know what you're talking about. Setting them up.
No,
You're
I
trying
mean,
to get a comment about a circumstance that took place, and when I listened to it and I saw what was taken, what was reported upon, I should say. My thing was, the population doesn't want to hear that. All right, I don't know what the point of doing that was, because at the end of the day, if you were to look, because the reality is that crime is not only about murders, but murders is one of the indicators that is most noticeable. What is probably more important is the amount of other crime, theft and assaults and that kind of stuff. Those the count on those probably impact upon people even more. But because murder or homicide is something that is so easily countable, when somebody says in a statement, we can't do anything about a homicide, we need to pray about it. It speaks to like, well, I have no power anymore over this. So let's just give up and say a prayer.
Yeah, essentially, accepting defeat. You ain't even started to play the game.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
But you are
But
defeated.
but I don't understand too. I mean, there's some logic to the statement, in the sense that homicides aren't predictable in the general sense, especially if the homicide is something that is, and we go down a rabbit's hole here. Just letting you know, a homicide is either going to be premeditated or it's going to be spontaneous. If my thinking about it is, spontaneous homicide is not something that you can prevent, because it's something that at the moment it happens, somebody gets angry, and they lash out at somebody and they end up killing them. They probably didn't mean to do it, but their inability to control their rage and their emotion led to the homicide taking place. But premeditated homicides, where a gang decides to load up and go down to a particular area and put a hit out on somebody, there are things that precursor that. Those are the kind of homicides that I think something might be able to be done if there's sufficient information passing between the powers that be to be able to put things into place for it. I don't know. I mean, Dr. King is a better person for you to have this conversation with. I think you met Dr. King, right? In ethics.
Yes, sir.
Right. He was a better person to put that question to. God, who we're talking to all the time.
Sion, you're talking to Sion.
No. That question that came up before, it wasn't Sion.
Sion asked that question.
So that was Frank Tom.
Mr. Frank Tom, yes, Frank. Frank is frankly setting me up all over. All right, Mr. Jack. Yeah, trying to get things from you. Yes, Jack, what's up?
Just one thing before we move on. How do you treat with, or I'm gonna say how you treat with, but it's about a possibility that your legitimate power that you have could be negatively affected by you doing the correct thing within an organization.
Of course. That can happen. That's because the correct thing is seen as the wrong thing by the rank and file. I have seen that happen all the time. You're trying to get people to follow the rules of the organization, but the rules of the organization are widely accepted as being non-relevant. And if you if you try to enforce that from your position of power, you are moving against the culture of the organization. And the culture of the organization is more powerful than the position that anybody holds in it. Because I'm telling you, if the organizational culture does not allow for particular type of thinking or behavior, it ain't gonna happen. I'll let you know. You all know about red lines in sign-in books. You all know about that red line that
Yes,
is
sir.
drawn in a
Yes.
sign-in book, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You know your superiors cannot do that. You
So
know
I
that.
just realized
No,
that
sir. No, way.
about a year ago.
Please enlighten me, please.
Barry, enlighten your people about that. That's against human resource regulations. You can't draw a line in any book that is registering people's attendance. That's an honor system you're working with there. That people have to voluntarily come in and sign the time they actually arrive. The tradition in the public sector is that they're going to put a time within the allowable late coming time frames, right? Because they don't want a whole heap of late minutes coming up on their report. The act of a supervisor drawing a red line in a book was supposedly to prevent people from falsifying their arrival times. And that went to industrial relations court and was ruled as being, there's a phrase they used to describe it, and I can't remember it. But I know it's seen as being an illegal activity by any supervisor. And they're not allowed to draw a red line in a book anymore. Which again is where culture in an organization would negate legitimate power from behaving in what they see as the correct manner. Coming to work.
So there's employee regulations going against?
You can't draw, a supervisor cannot draw. The book actually doesn't belong to the supervisor. It actually belongs to the ministry. And it is summary from the ministry.
But which regulations you said? You said there's no.
It's not a regulation. It went to industrial relations court. And the court ruled on the activity of redlining as something that was illegal and could only be done by somebody from the HR department from the Ministry of Education. But that was in our case here. Barry and Jack, hands up. Means comment. Yes, Barry.
So I was going to say to Gibbs, that redlining comes similar to us using red pens inside the station diary, because it doesn't belong to us, and it's a book that we use for evidence. You're not supposed to do anything pertaining to red to it.
Interesting. Mr. Jack?
Yeah, that was basically the same thing, because in our organization, the station logbook can be used as a legal document.
Correct.
Right? So any and anyone, especially people who don't have the authority, should be
writing inside.
Writing anything inside of that
or drawing line and thing.
Yes, and draw a line, and because it could say that you wasn't present when he was actually present, so that is
correct.
Yeah. Well, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is actually quite different, right?
In what sense?
That you can use red ink, right, in official registers, but the police service standing orders specify when you can use those red ink. So, for example, if you're talking about writing the description of a firearm, right?
Yeah.
Because you can use red. So let me say like the serial number, the ammunition, that kind of thing, would go in red.
Yeah, but what we're saying is that it can't be used as a punitive measure anymore.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It can be used to differentiate critical information from regular information. Barry, you still have something you want to say? See your hand still up.
No, sir, sorry.
Okay, cool. All right, so other sources of power. Coercive power. This is power that an individual will have because they have the rank or authority to punish people. It's like your parents. You know, your parents have coercive power over children up to a particular age, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that using this kind of coercion is not necessarily a good thing. In organization, coercive power is not necessarily going to be physical power, but it's going to be the ability to either remove some sort of reward or bonus that you might have gotten, or to remove benefits. Is negative in nature, as opposed to the next one, which is reward power. All right, reward power is power again that an individual may have that gives them the ability to reward people. So sort of like motivational theory here. So reward power, you get this power because you're the source of that reward, giving you what we call rewards, privileges, maybe bonuses, that type of stuff. Or it could be intangibles like support and praise. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about there in relation to that. So that's the 5 sources of power that we have. Okay, what's wrong with my keyboard now? All right. Okay, so one of the things that they talk about here is the fact that oftentimes we give power away when we don't actually know we have that power. So, for example, when you have legitimate power, we might give it away when we say something like, let's talk about that first because we might have some additional ideas that would be helpful. If that means that basically when somebody has power, they give it up because they get some sort of confrontation. So somebody who has legitimate power and is fairly new at their job might give up that power to make a decision while they're waiting on some consensus from other people in the organization. And that in itself can be a bit problematic. It's unfortunate that you might give it up as a result of that. For some reason, I'm just kind of skipped over everything here, right? Okay. Another way is that you might give power to somebody who doesn't quite have it yet. So I've seen this happen in right. Okay. Right, intentionally giving away. All right, so we might give somebody power because we believe them to be an expert, but that's not true. So, for example, I might unknowingly assume that Mr. Barry White is a music person and therefore give him power because of his name. But that might not be true, right, Barry? You
Definitely, sir. Not
you
true at all.
might be that legendary Barry White that I know so much about. So you ascribe to somebody power because they may have something that you think you know, but you're doing it incorrectly. Happens in groups too, huh? In terms of sometimes you give somebody power based upon like I use this example. I oftentimes ask students in my economics classes who has had prior knowledge of or prior work with economics, and therefore I say to them, listen, as you have prior knowledge and you've done some previous work in economics, I'd like to give you the opportunity to lead groups in the class for the group work that's to come, because then maybe you can mentor people with the material, and that oftentimes proves to be absolutely incorrect in terms of ascribing to them some form of knowledge that gives them power over others. Some people rise to the occasion and say, yes, I'll take on that. Other people take it on, but then just abuse it altogether. It's something that you have to be careful with when, as a leader, you start to empower other people over others. Um, it is something that you have to pay attention to. One of the ways in which we respond to power, hold a second, Barry, is that power comes with a level of fright or fear. And we have to remember this, that in a lot of organizations, when somebody is given power, it will create, for some people in the organization, some level of fear, especially when that fear comes with some sort of punishment. Especially if somebody sees the person who's giving out the punishment is ascribed as somebody who has legitimate power for it. Yes, Barry, you wanted to say something?
So I was going to say that in accordance to public safety regulations,
Uh-huh.
you were seeing where this person was given a certain amount of power by way of seniority. Hence, it is
Yes.
say seniority, acted as by seniority.
Yeah.
But then they realize that those persons who are senior in the organization may not have the qualification. So then they move to merit. Now, if it is you have both merit and seniority, it's all well and good. But the subscription now is by way of merit or qualification to perform that particular function as opposed to seniority.
Yeah, that's because there's been a lot of instances where people who have been in particular situations or been in an organization for a particular length of time, they um, didn't learn from the organization enough to be able to manage particular aspects of it without additional training. So what they're saying is that your experience at work is insufficient to take up the position of power. Now, the problem that came with that was that when they started to move over from seniority to meritocracy, that's the system that they were utilizing. They did not inform staff that was currently in the system that they needed to if they wanted positions of promotions within the organization, that they needed to seek additional qualifications. And more importantly, the organization wasn't granting time off for people to go and study. I remember that had happened to my father actually at one point in time when he petitioned the ministry to go on to do a master's degree and a PhD. Well, it's sort of like a DBH, um, a doctoral program that he wanted to go into, but it wouldn't grant him the time off to go and do it because they they didn't see the need for somebody with a doctoral position teaching in the organization. And that really was a limiting type of activity that takes place. And that actually is what resulted in a lot of people having problems in the public sector, where they refuse to accept and actually queried a lot of those promotions because they had seniority. Because you can't midstream change your methods of promotion while you have people in one thing. Keith, you need to mute your microphone. All right. All right. So one of the things that we talked about in terms of power is that people see power as a zero-sum game. It's either you have it or you don't, right? But the reality is that in the model, we don't see power as being a finite resource. It is something that has to be and can be shared. And therefore, there's an infinite amount of it. And sharing that power with somebody else can amplify your own power. So once you do that, um, it's important for us to understand that sharing power is just as powerful as being, or even more powerful than holding all that power to yourself. Now, conventional leadership tells us that when you share power by empowering others, it shows as a sign of being indecisive, or you're avoiding your responsibility because you're giving other people your responsibilities by giving the power over. But that is not true. The truth about it is that even though you are delegating responsibility, activities to other people, the responsibility of the final results still lies with you. What you've done is you've kind of found out the tasks to be accomplished, but you are still maintaining the responsibility. At the end of the day, the buck stops with you, kind of situation. All right. So that delegation is not the same as empowerment. Delegation is just farming out work. Empowerment is more than that. Empowerment is not only handing over responsibility, but also handing over the resources that they require. And empowering also means that you don't just leave them on their own to do that, but you also work with them to build their capacity for empowerment across the board. That's why they refer to it as, you're not hoarding your power. But unfortunately, you all are in situations where a lot of the older heads may see holding on to power as the only way they can move forward in their circumstances. And therefore, when they do that, they oftentimes, if they are forced to hand over responsibilities to other people, they would look to setting you up. And that kind of thing is what I was talking about before, where people pretend to share power and empower others, but really what they're doing is they're giving power over, but handicapping you so that they know you will fail, and then use your failure as a reason why they shouldn't be giving power over to other people. So again, it's a position, a mindset that has to change. The paradigm has to switch, that from away from power being something that one individual holds on to, but something that is shared among all the people within an organization. Self-empowerment. This is the responsibility of followers now. Followers must actually want to become self-empowered. So the concept here now is that as a follower in an organization or subordinate in an organization, you must look to do things that help to improve your ability to become empowered in the organization, which means it could be a host of things, getting specific training done, going to, leadership programs. That type of thing will help you in terms of providing the skills necessary for an individual in leadership to look upon you as a good potential candidate to empower in the organization to help increase the ability. So self-empowerment requires 6 methods in which you can do it. Education, we spoke about that. Taking responsibility and leading in certain activities. Structuring, right? That is creating structural factors such as arranging your day, bringing people to the table, changing policy. So basically, setting yourself up in such a way that you facilitate empowerment of yourself and others around you. All right, providing others with the resources necessary to get their job done, and providing self-empowerment circumstances and situation, mentoring other people, either as from the leader yourself or as individual who's empowering you, mentor other people with you to take charge of things, and of course acting on it and claiming it. That's the actualization part. So it is important that as a leader, you value empowerment of people in your organization, because you look upon them as being the next set of people who will take charge of the organization and move it forward in your absence going down the road. In so doing, you have to be careful that you don't end up doing something which we refer to as marginalization. So mattering and marginality is what we're speaking about here. When mattering, if something is important to you, it matters to you. And in an organization, a leader is responsible to make everything matter, especially those things that are critical and important for the organization moving forward. If you, however, have people in your organization that you believe don't need to be involved, then you are marginalizing those individuals. Now, I've often seen when organizations are making big changes, significant changes, they have a tendency to marginalize groups of employees in the organization. In particular, they have a tendency to marginalize those people who are at the bottom rung of the organization. I could say, for instance, security personnel and custodians tend to get marginalized quickly in an organization. And interestingly enough, those people are some of the first sets of people with whom anybody interacting with your organization come into contact with: your security officers and your cleaners. The cleaners have to deal with the worst parts of your organization. And if you want positive change to take place in your organization, you need to make sure that they are part of that movement. And you ought to empower them, because they can come to you with things you're not even looking at in terms of making changes, in terms of achieving your vision and your mission. They can see things from a perspective that you as somebody at the upper echelons of the organization cannot see, because they have a different perspective of how things are going, and you're actually marginalizing some of the best resources that you have. So that's something that, as you go about empowering people, you make everybody, you make things matter to everybody across the board, and you restrict the amount of marginalization that is taking place in your activities. That's something that you have to pay attention to. We spoke already about creating empowering environments, and that's something that um, we can't say enough about. In order to be empowering, you have to create an environment that promotes that mattering for everybody. If you don't, then you're going to keep on pushing people to the edges and into the margins. You want to not do that, so that, in essence, what you're trying to do is to make sure that everybody matters, and there's nobody who doesn't matter across the board. All right. So we talked that. So this. All right. So this is all right. We're good with this. I think we covered most of this here. All right. Organizational dynamics. Culture is another part of organizational dynamics. Really refers to the organizational cultures. You actually have to try and make sure that your organizational culture encourages empowerment rather than discourages it, because culture kills vision. I'll tell you this much. There's a statement that that is made a lot. Organizational culture eats vision for lunch. And that is true, because you could have as much vision as you want, but the culture of the organization will rip that vision apart if it doesn't agree with it. So it is critical to ensure that your organizational culture and dynamics is supportive of these moves that you're trying to make. If they are diametrically opposed, then nothing is going to happen. No amount of effort, save except if you just fire everybody and start building a brand new organization. All right, that organizational dynamic will not change if you can't get it to evolve. It's really a very poor thing to be looking at, but we'll see how it goes. But it's important for you to do that. As I say, culture eats vision for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All right, so we spoke about delegation already. So let's move from empowering to ethics. And very simply, what the ethical part of this is that, first and foremost, a lot of the leadership models never really focus on the ethics of the environment, the relationship, and the individuals. This one speaks to the need for our ethical values and moral principles to be at the forefront of the relationship between leaders and followers, and in reverse as well. And it has to be ethics that is true ethics, values that are values that you show and you exhibit in all walks of life. That's one of the things that is really important. So we talked about ethics here in terms of where it comes from, what ethics are, what moral values are, and how they arrive at. You all have done this already, I believe, in ethics with Dr. King. I believe you all did it with him. But at the end of the day, what we're speaking about here is the ethical standards that you create or that you govern your life with should be the same ethical values that you should be moving with in leadership, in your leadership potential. Now, that means you need to be having high levels of moral and ethical values. Now, the problem that comes up here now, as we've spoken about this, is where there's transition of values and ethical standards in society over time frames. It takes a while for ethical values to change, moral values to change, social values to change, and at the end of the day, what we're looking for is some sort of stability with those moral values that we're talking about. So much so that particular professions establishes their own ethical values. So if you think about accounting, you think about the bar, the legal ethics, you think about well, I know the teaching service, we have an ethical document. Even you as students, you have a code of conduct that you're supposed to follow as well. Almost every profession has established its own code of ethics and standards to govern behavior across the board. But when we speak to leadership, we're speaking to higher than professional things. We're speaking to having ethical values that would be encompassed both in your private and public spheres of life. So there's the correlation between the two. In essence, therefore, ethics is at the heart of everything that you're doing from a particular. So important is ethics and moral values that there are two chapters that are being presented from two different texts in this program. Because of the ethical and moral issues that come to bear on leadership positions and leadership decision making and how you go about developing the relationships that we speak about there. Now, you're going to be focused a lot on this, so I'm going to just run through this very quickly and get us to the next area because I'm running out of time and I'd like to kind of cover most of this. So there are a lot of issues involved with ethical and moral leadership, part of which is the sort of gap we have between the societal rules and actual types of displayed rules from the leaders. That's something that you're going to have to treat with as well, in terms of where we see a lot of our leaders conducting themselves in very unethical activities, and that becomes problematic because it then erodes the respect that we have for leaders in our society moving forward. All right. The model that we're speaking to is a model that says that we have to commit to very high levels of moral and ethical values in terms of the nature of our leadership principles, as well as the nature of the relationship that we develop with each other in that organization. All right, so I want to come off of that leading by example. This is kind of basically where it comes from. The leader has to lead by example. So everything that we talked about in the process so far, inclusiveness, the vision that we spoke about, the ethical values, everything has to be exhibited by the leader so that he proves himself to be exceptional, and well, not really exceptional, that what he's doing is something that everybody ought to be doing. So you have to lead by example. And a lot of times far too often we have a situation where leading by example is no longer seen as being an important thing. And this statement here, what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say, is something where a lot of times we have leaders who say one thing but do something absolutely opposite. And that really emphasizes the importance that the way in which you behave has to reflect the values that you hold. And it really does come together, because if you behave in one manner, then regardless of what you say, these are the values you're exhibiting. Children see this very quickly when they look at adults. And if we are hypocritical to them from that perspective, think about it from how you feel as an adult looking at a leader that is supposed to be leading your organization behaving like that. It's sort of, I've seen a lot of previous CEOs and stuff like that lose their jobs because they were exposed as philanderers and that type of stuff. Simply because those weren't the values that the organization was looking at having in their lead their organization, because it's not the value structure or the value systems that they saw as being useful for their vision and mission statements. All right. So one of the things that they speak about is being true to yourself, which is you cannot lie about your principles, because you can it will eventually show itself up in one circumstance or another. People have suffered from this delusion so often, it's not funny. It's something that you have to really think about and pay attention to. All right. Okay, so leading by example, we spoke to this. I think we can move on by this. I think everybody understands, hopefully, this thing. Right, so we come to the, more or less coming to the end here. Leadership is about the relational process, is a process. And the reason why we want it as a process, we want primarily that we understand that it's something that's going to happen and happen again and keep on going around and around. More importantly, it's a process that we can repeat, and that it can be repeated in different circumstances, so that it's not only fit for one particular, it's not only fit for work, but it's fit for social groupings, community groupings. It's even a process that can be utilized in developing leadership and leadership potential in your own household. Because how else would you train your children and the individuals in your household to become leaders if you don't provide opportunities for them to be leaders? So the process is one that's interchangeable in terms of circumstance, but also interchangeable in terms of being process oriented between organizations that you work with. So the idea is that once we identify it as a process, it's something that we can work and rework and repeat and repeat. So that's the whole situation. There is it's about, I think I have a diagram here that really brings it to the a diagram. This whole, right here it is. It's sort of like this process here, where whenever we run we go through the process, we gather data, we format that data into information. That information then feeds us into our knowledge base. That knowledge then affects our understanding of the circumstances. That understanding brings with it wisdom, and that wisdom then affects our thoughts and action. And that thought and action starts again, and we link back with the data collection, because the whole thing about it as being a process is that one action feeds into the next, feeds into the other, and improves. So again, I speak about this spiral, this outward spiral of the process improving us every time. And one of the things that is important in the process is taking the time to reflect on things. Meaning making is one of the things that you can look at as well. But So reflection becomes a very important part of the process, and it's often something that is neglected in models. Reflection and contemplation is critical, and we cannot only focus on what went wrong. We have to also focus on what went right, because the both of them require attention for us to be able to understand both. That makes sense? We need to reflect and contemplate upon what is good, what is right, what is wrong, and work towards repeating what is right or improving what is right and correcting what was wrong. That makes sense? Yes? This is why a process has to be it has to be a repeatable thing altogether. So we've kind of gotten into, let me just kind of come quickly to the summary here. So we've gone through the relational leadership model. We've identified that is built around those 5 concepts. The concept of the vision or its purpose, the concept of inclusion, the concept of empowerment, the concept of ethical values that govern everything, and the fact that the entire relational leadership model is about building a process of being able to develop this type of leadership in a repeatable format, and one that is built into self-improvement. So you're building into the system self-improvement across the board. That makes sense so far? Now, this is a lot of information. In fact, I've even missed out some things. So you're free to go and download this and kind of go through it again, or even just look at the chapter 3 on it and so on. I don't need you to memorize anything. What I need you to take away from these presentations that I did is a general understanding of what each chapter was trying to do. This chapter is just overviewing the relational leadership process. Look at it. How do you feel about it? Is this something you think that you could utilize in your own leadership potential moving forward? Because all of you all are going back into the organization, into leadership positions, and you already have leadership positions in your families and possibly in your communities that you're operating in. So look at the model, and as we continue our development of it, look and see whether or not it's something that you would like to take forward. Are there parts of this that you like, parts you don't like? Those are the kind of reflections that you're going to be utilizing, especially at the end, nearing the end of the program, when you have to do your final reflections and leadership plan moving forward. Those are the kind of things you want you to look at. What can you take from this model? Can you take the entire thing, or does only parts of it make sense for you? Those are the kind of things that we want to talk about and move forward with. All right. So any questions about anything so far?
No, sir.
No? Everybody kind of gets everything? So again, as I said before, there's no need for you to memorize anything at this point in time. There's a lot that we can, treat with otherwise. All right, so if there are no questions, I'm going to stop the recordings now.